Why did she still hesitate, hand resting on the worn steering wheel, when the hard part was supposed to be behind her? Maya Rodriguez sat in the driver's seat of her battered Honda Civic, staring at the looming concrete walls of Blackwater Tactical Academy. All around her, lifted trucks, gleamed with military decals, expensive SUVs idled with tinted windows. She could almost feel the weight of the rifle case in the back seat, her great-grandfather's Springfield, 1903 duct-taped canvas and all. The others would arrive with weapons that looked like spacecraft. She had a relic from another century. She told herself that was the point, that there was a reason she'd brought it. But the longer she sat there, the louder the voices from her past seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here anymore." When she finally stepped inside, the air shifted. 23 of the best shooters in the world looked her over, some curious, most amused. The laughter started after the first glance at her flannel shirt, worn jeans, and the faded rifle sling. Jake Morrison, Army Ranger turned self-appointed king of the firing line, smirked at her confirmation letter like it was a bad joke. "Your grandfather's hunting rifle?" He sneered. "Great-grandfather's," she corrected softly. That only made it worse. But when Colonel Stevens walked in, the room's tone changed. His eyes tracked the way she handled the weapon, quick, practiced, and entirely without thought. It wasn't the rifle that interested him. It was her hands. The first challenge came fast. One shot, 800 yards, ace of spades. Winner gets immunity from elimination. Morrison's high-tech marvel landed near the card's edge. Marcus Webb of the FBI did better. But as the lineup moved, it became clear no one could touch the center. Not until Maya stepped forward with iron sights and no calculations. She studied the wind, the shimmer of heat on the horizon, the grass swaying just so. Then without ceremony she fired, dead center. The silence after was heavier than the shot. Stevens kept looking through his scope, as if trying to prove to himself it had really happened. They too stripped away the jokes. Curiosity replaced ridicule. Sarah Kim, a Marine sniper, sat beside Maya at lunch, her voice low. "Who trained you?" Maya's answer, "My great-grandfather," was the truth, but only part of it. The moving target drills began, crosswinds complicating every shot. Morrison scored 4 hits. Webb? 5? Maya? 8 out of 8, her shots breaking targets. In mid-flight with timing that didn't follow the rulebook. When 2 clays launched from opposite ends of the valley, an unwinnable setup, she broke both before the others could blink. Stevens's expression darkened, not with doubt, but with recognition. "I've seen this before. Somewhere I wasn't supposed to." The stress drill came next 2 miles with a 50-pound pack before engaging targets. The others stumbled under. The weight, Maya's breathing barely changed. Her accuracy sharpened under strain. Watching her, Stevens noted the subtle deviations from standard doctrine stance, bolt work, breathing control. These weren't just the habits of a gifted shooter. They were the fingerprints of a program that didn't officially exist. On the final morning, the course was a maze of impossible scenarios. Hostage rescues, moving vehicles, dual elevation targets. A final shot into smoke at 1,000 yards. One by one, the best in the world failed. Morrison never made it past the hostage stage. Sarah Kim fell at the smoke shot. When Maya stepped up, the stillness in her eyes was different. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was measuring herself. Every stage fell in rapid succession, precise, economical, inevitable. The smoke-shrouded target went down on a single shot, the kind you don't take unless you already know it will land. That was when Stevens stepped close, voice low enough for only her to hear. Only Vipers train like that. The words hit her like a trigger pull. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Recognition, calculation, and an assessment of whether he needed to disappear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had changed. The softness gone, replaced by the controlled calm of someone who had once been lethal by profession. He spoke another name, Maria Santis, and the air between them tightened. Operation Nightfall. The missions that never made the news. 43 confirmed kills, all at ranges others called impossible. The arms dealer in Kandahar. The embassy roof in Somalia. Viper 7. Officially, she'd died years ago. Unofficially, she'd walked away from a shadow war no one was allowed to admit existed. Retired, she told him. "And if you know that name, you know why I can't be her anymore." "Then why here?" he asked. Her answer was simple, but it cut through the morning cold like a blade. "Because sometimes the old skills get rusty, and sometimes the world reminds you that retirement is just another word for waiting." The others didn't hear the exchange, but they felt the shift. She was no longer the quiet woman with the antique rifle. She was something else. Something they didn't have a name for, but Stevens did dot by the time they packed up. The wind had shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain. Stevens watched her walk away, the Springfield slung across her shoulder, each step deliberate, like she already knew where she was going next. He'd seen operators vanish before, but this felt different. The Viper wasn't disappearing back into obscurity. She was heading towards something that would need her. And when it came, she wouldn't miss. Sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue or explain or beg for belief. It simply acts and leaves the rest in silence. The sun had only been up for a few hours, but the range already felt different. No one was laughing anymore. Not after yesterday. They had all seen it. The impossible shot. Iron sights across 800 yards. A perfect hole through the center of an ace of spades. No calculations. No electronics. Just her. And now, as Maya walked across the gravel toward the firing line for day 2, conversations lowered. Glances trailed after her dot. It wasn't the kind of attention she liked. She had learned long ago that curiosity could be just as dangerous as ridicule. When they laughed, they underestimated you. When they got quiet, they started to wonder. At the far bench, Maya set her rifle case down, the fabric frayed enough that the canvas sagged in places. She unbuckled the straps and pulled out the Springfield, its worn walnut stock catching the morning light. The smell of gun oil clung to her hands, a smell she had lived with for most of her life, a smell she could recognize even in her sleep. One piece at a time, she broke it down, ran the cloth along the barrel, checked the action. The routine was meditative muscle memory from thousands of repetitions. She didn't need to think about what she was doing. Her mind was somewhere else, skimming through memories she didn't invite. A street in Aleppo. The echo of a shot inside a corridor that reeked of diesel and blood. A windless morning in Somalia. The seconds stretching too long before a radio finally confirmed target neutralized. "Mind if I sit?" She glanced up. Sarah Kim stood there, the Marine sniper she'd clocked yesterday for her lack of mockery. The one who hadn't joined in the smirks or the jokes. Sarah's rifle was slung casually over her shoulder, but there was nothing casual in her eyes. Maya nodded toward the bench. "Go ahead." Sarah lowered herself onto the wood, resting her rifle across her lap. "That shot yesterday. I've been replaying it in my head all night." Maya kept cleaning the Springfield. I've made shots like that," Sarah continued, "but with a 20-power scope, laser rangefinders, ballistic calculators. You did it with," she gestured to the rifle, "that's not just difficult, that's borderline impossible. The human eye can't even resolve a playing card that far out." Silence stretched between them. Maya had learned long ago that silence could be a shield. "Who trained you?" Sarah finally asked, Maya's voice was even. My great-grandfather. The truth. But not the whole truth. Before Sarah could press, Colonel Stevens's voice rolled across the range. Moving targets. Let's see who's hunting and who's just shooting. The group gathered on the upper firing deck overlooking a valley. Mechanical launchers sat hidden among the brush, ready to throw clay pigeons in unpredictable arcs. The rules were simple. 90 seconds, 3 launch positions, 8 total targets. The valley wind was gusting across them, shifting patterns every few seconds. A nightmare for even the best shooters. Jake Morrison went first. His stance was solid, his breathing measured. The first clay erupted into the air. His shot connected. Clean. The second came from a hard angle. He missed by inches. By the end, he'd broken 4. The others nodded politely. Respectable. Marcus Webb, all precision and calculation, managed 5. David Chun, the Olympic shooter, only 3. Then, it was Maya's turn. She stepped to the line, but instead of dropping to a prone or kneeling position like the rest, she stayed standing. The Springfield rested lightly in her hands, her stance looking almost relaxed, like she was about to take a shot at a tin can in her backyard. The first target launched. Her rifle swung as if on instinct, the shot breaking earlier than the watchers expected, and still the clay disintegrated mid-air. The second target flew from the opposite side. Again, too early. And again, dead on. Whispers rippled behind her. On the third launch, she didn't even appear to track the pigeon through the scope. Her eyes were somewhere else, her body anticipating its path. The bullet was already on its way when the target reached the point. She knew it would be Dot by the time the 5th target shattered. The range had gone silent. Then came the impossible moment. 2 pigeons, opposite ends of the valley, launched almost simultaneously. Every shooter here knew what that meant. Pick one and forget the other. The transition time alone would make it a lost cause. Her first shot took the left at the peak of its arc. Without a pause, she worked the bolt and swung right, firing a breath later. Both targets rained orange fragments into the valley. When the clock stopped, she'd gone 8 for 8. From behind his stopwatch, Stevens didn't look impressed. He looked troubled. He had seen this kind of shooting before. Not on civilian ranges, not even in the military's top sniper schools. This was something older, rarer. And much harder to explain. The wind picked up as the afternoon wore on, carrying the dry scent of dust and brass across the range. Targets were replaced. Scopes recalibrated. But something in the air had shifted. The others didn't talk to her much, not directly. But she could feel them circling in quiet ways. A question here, a glance there, as if each was trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't realized existed before yesterday. Stevens didn't ask her to demonstrate again. He didn't need to. He had been watching since morning, but not just her shooting. The way she moved between stations. The way she positioned herself at the end of the bench so she could see every entrance. How her rifle never rested more than an arm's reach away, even during breaks. It wasn't just discipline. It was habit, the kind you didn't pick up at weekend courses. When the last of the moving target gear was packed away, Stevens called them to the dirt trail at the far end of the compound. 2 miles, 50-pound pack. When you reach the firing zone, engage the posted targets. Timed run. This isn't about comfort. It's about what happens when you're tired, when your lungs burn and your hands won't stay steady. The packs were waiting, heavy with sandbags and spare ammo. Maya shrugged hers on, feeling the straps settle into the old grooves on her shoulders. She hadn't carried one in years, but her body remembered. Jake went first. The sound of his boots pounding the trail faded into the scrub. When he came into view again, sweat streaked his face, his chest heaving. His shots wavered on the targets, still hitting but slower. Marcus followed, Steadier, more deliberate, but slower still. Even Sarah Kim's breathing hitched under the weight, her last shot breaking just a fraction wide. Maya took the trail. At an even pace, her breathing deep and quiet. The pack rode easy, the kind of weight her body had once worn for days at a time. She reached the firing zone, unshouldered to Springfield, and without breaking rhythm, began placing shots one after. Another dot, no hesitation. No visible correction. The clink of spent brass on dry earth was the only sound besides the report of the rifle. Stevens watched through binoculars, but he wasn't watching for accuracy anymore. Every shot landed dead center. He was watching the small things. The way she shifted her stance to match the wind before the gusts reached her. The way she smoothed her breathing not just between shots, but in anticipation of them. The speed of her bolt work, too fast for an unmodified Springfield, unless you drilled until it became an extension of your own hands. Thought it was familiar, uncomfortably familiar. She finished with time to spare, shouldered the pack, and started back toward the others without looking at her targets. She didn't need to. Jake muttered something under his breath as she passed, but it didn't carry the same edge as yesterday's insults. There was no mockery left in his voice, only the low, unsettled tone of someone who'd seen enough to know when they were outmatche. Stevens called for a short break. Most of the shooters grabbed water, sat on ammo crates, or leaned against benches. Maya stayed on her feet, scanning the range's perimeter the way someone might scan an unfamiliar street in a hostile city. Her eyes didn't stop moving until the next drill was called, and Stevens was done pretending he wasn't watching her. The third morning came in under a low gray sky, the kind of light that flattens everything. No shadows, no warmth, just a cold wash over concrete and gravel. Maya was already at the range when most of the others were still nursing coffee. She'd claimed a bench in the far corner, methodically loading single rounds into her ammo pouch. The ritual was slow, deliberate, like she was measuring time with each brass case. Stevens arrived later than usual, but he wasn't moving with his usual ease. His jaw was tight, his eyes set in a way that told her he'd been thinking too much. Maybe making phone calls. Maybe asking questions he wasn't supposed to. The rest of the group trickled in. Their voices were subdued, and Maya could feel it in their eyes. The gap between her and them had widened. She was no longer just the woman with the antique rifle. She was something else, and none of them quite knew what to do with that. Stevens didn't bother with warm-ups. Instead, he gestured toward the far edge of the range, where a new maze of barriers and target stands had been set up overnight. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll face the final evaluation. 3 days of drills lead to this. It's the hardest scenario we run. Only 3 shooters have ever finished it without a penalty." Jake gave a low whistle. "What's the record time?" "Not relevant," Stevens replied. His eyes never left Maya. The description sounded simple enough until the details landed. A simulated hostage rescue gone wrong. Targets at multiple distances. Mixed threats and civilians, all appearing in a strict, unmarked sequence. A moving vehicle at 600 yards that had to be stopped. A precision shot at 400. Neutralizing a target, holding a hostage without touching the innocent. Dual targets at different elevations to be hit almost simultaneously. And the last, a 1,000-yard target hidden behind rolling smoke. No line of sight. The point, Stevens said, is not perfection. It's decision-making under pressure. The wrong call here gets people killed. The wrong pace costs you the clock. You'll have 90 seconds total. From the corner of her vision, Maya saw Jake lean toward Marcus Webb. 90 seconds? That's a setup for failure. Exactly, Marcus muttered back. Stevens dismissed them for the rest of the day, telling them to rest. But Maya noticed he lingered by the benches as they packed their gear. When the others finally drifted toward the parking lot, he stayed behind, his boots crunching on the gravel until he was standing a few feet from her. "You've been holding back," he said quietly. She didn't look up from her rifle. "I've been passing the drills. That's not what I mean." His tone carried weight now, an undercurrent she'd heard from men who already knew the answer to the question they were asking. "Your stance, your wind calls, the way you transition between targets, that's not standard, not even elite military standard." She slid the bolt closed, the metallic click sharp in the air. "Maybe I just practice more than most." He leaned in slightly, his voice lower. "I've seen these patterns before. Not here, not in open courses, and not from anyone who admits where they learned them." Finally, she met his eyes. They were searching her face, looking for a flicker, the deep kind that would confirm he was right. But she gave him nothing. Sometimes you see what you want to see. "Colonel." Stevens straightened, but the set of his jaw told her he wasn't letting this go. "Tomorrow will tell," he said, and walked away. She watched him cross the gravel, his back straight, the collar of his jacket snapping in the wind. She knew that posture. It belonged to someone who had already decided he was going to get his answer. And part of her wondered, not for the first time in years, whether she was ready for someone to know. The final morning broke colder than the day before. The damp wind came rolling off the trees beyond the range, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and metal. Low clouds pressed the light down until the entire compound felt trapped in an early dusk. Maya arrived before the others again, walking the length of the gravel like she'd been here for years instead of 3 days. The Springfield was slung casually across her back, the duct-taped case hanging from her shoulder. From a distance, she might have looked like someone headed to a small town range to plinket cans, but anyone who had watched her these past 2 days knew better. Colonel Stevens was already on the line. He stood over a complex sprawl of targets, mechanical rigs, and barriers, a labyrinth built from steel, wood, and shadow. He had spent hours here the night before, finalizing every angle, every wind trap, every delay mechanism. The course wasn't designed for fairness. It was designed to break shooters. He looked up when she approached. "Morning, Rodriguez." "Sir." She scanned the setup without moving closer. From here, she could already see where the barriers would choke the line of sight, where the mechanical pivoting targets would expose themselves for only a heartbeat before vanishing again. "Sleep well?" he asked. She caught the weight in his tone, the probing edge behind an ordinary question. "Well enough." For a moment, he studied her like he was trying to memorize every flicker of her expression. She wondered how much he'd uncovered since yesterday. How many quiet calls, how many questions asked to people who wouldn't admit they knew her name. The others arrived in clusters, carrying their rifles in carbon fiber cases, gear strapped tight to their backs. They stopped short when they saw the course. Jake Morrison let out a low whistle. "What the hell is this?" Stevens's voice carried over them. "This is your final evaluation. In 30 years of running this program, only 3 shooters have completed it successfully. You have 90 seconds to finish all stages. Targets must be engaged in sequence. Hit the wrong one, you're out. Miss more than twice, you're out. Run out of time." He let the sentence trail off. He didn't need to finish it. Jake muttered, "This isn't just hard. This is suicide." "That's the point," Stevens said flatly. He walked them through the stages. First, a moving vehicle at 600 yards, rolling fast along a curved track, 1 shot to stop it. Second, a hostage rescue at 400 yards. The hostage silhouette was nearly flush with the threat target, the gap between them barely wider than a human hair at that distance. Third, dual targets at different elevations, 1 high, 1 low, both appearing simultaneously. Engage them both before either disappears. And last, a 1,000-yard target hidden behind a wall of machine-generated smoke. No direct visibility. Engage based on your memory of its exact position. "You'll go one at a time," Stevens said. "Observers will confirm hits." The order was set. Jake went first, jaw tight. steps heavy with the weight of knowing this course was meant to beat him. His rifle came up fast for the moving vehicle, and the shot cracked through the cold air. The round struck metal. The car rocked, but the angle was off. It kept rolling. His second stage hostage shot went wide, the edge of the bullet nicking the hostage's outline. He lowered his rifle before the clock even ran out. Marcus Webb was more deliberate, his every movement calculated. He stopped the moving vehicle in one round, slid into the hostage shot with a precision hit, but when the dual targets popped up, he made the fatal error. His elevation change was too slow, and the high target dropped before his shot broke. Sarakin came close, so close it hurt to watch. Clean hits on the first 3 stages, perfect form, steady breathing, but the smoke shot broke her. She hesitated, scanning for a glimpse that would never come, and the seconds bled away, one by one. The shooters walked off the line, shaking their heads. No one had finished, and then it was her turn. Maya stepped to the line without fanfare. She knelt briefly to adjust a sling on her Springfield, then rose into position. The others had seen her like this before, the stillness that came over her when she was about to fire. But today, it was heavier, colder. The air seemed to narrow around her, every sound muting except the low push of wind across the range. "Rodriguez," Stephen said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. "Begin when ready." The first stage, the moving vehicle, appeared on the fully owned far track. Accelerating fast, she didn't track it for long. One smooth motion, raise, sight, fire. The round punched through the windshield and into the engine block. The vehicle shuddered to a stop. Dead in its tracks, she was already pivoting before it fully stopped. Stage 2, hostage rescue. She knew the kind of target this was. She'd seen it before, only real. The hostage's silhouette shifted slightly in the wind, barely perceptible at 400 yards. She waited half a heartbeat for the sway to line up, then sent a single round into the threat's eye socket. The hostage silhouette didn't so much as tremble. Stage 3, the dual targets. She didn't bother adjusting her feet. Instead, she angled her upper body, her hands moving the rifle's weight as if it were part of her spine. The high target went down first, the bolt already working before the casing hit the gravel. The low target disappeared in a burst of paint. A fraction of a second later, she was moving into stage 4 with more than 20 seconds left. The smoke was thick, roiling with each gust. The target was gone to human eyes. She stepped slightly to her left, lining up with a point on the barrier, where she knew the target had been before the smoke screen began. She breathed once, twice. The wind shifted, barely enough to ripple the smoke, and she fired. Through the spotting scope, Stevens saw it. The center hit. Not just close. Dead center. The silence after was absolute. No mutters, no exhalations. Just the cold wind and the ringing in their ears from the shot. Stevens looked at his watch. Course completed. With 12 seconds to spare, a few shooters clapped. The sound awkward in the heavy air, but Stevens raised a hand, stopping it. He walked toward her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. When he was close enough that only she could hear him, he spoke. Only Vipers train like that. She froze, just for a fraction of a heartbeat, but it was enough. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes did. Recognition flickered there, followed by calculation, and then the cool assessment of whether he was a threat that needed removing. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," she said, but her voice had shifted. The uncertain civilian tone was gone. What replaced it was level, measured. The voice of someone who had made life and death calls more times than she could count. He didn't back away. "Maria Santis, Viper 7, 43 confirmed kills, all over 800 yards. Kandahar, the arms dealer. Somalia, the embassy. Roof, disappeared after Operation Nightfall, officially dead, unofficially." He let the sentence hang. The name hit her like a hammer wrapped in silk. She hadn't heard it spoken in years, not since the day she stopped being Maria Santis and started living as Maya Rodriguez. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, closer to her rifle stock, subtle enough that no one else saw, but Stevens noticed. He was watching for it. "You know why I can't be here anymore," she said finally. "I know," he said, and his tone told her he'd read the classified file. The politics, the cover-ups, the fallout that demanded ghosts remain ghosts. The rest of the shooters stood off to the side, sensing something was happening but unable to hear. Jake Morrison's grip tightened on his rifle, his instincts buzzing with an unease he couldn't place. Stevens's eyes didn't leave hers. Then why here? Why now? She gave him the smallest of smiles, cold, dangerous. Because sometimes the old skills get rusty, and sometimes the world reminds you that retirement is just another word for waiting. Something flickered in his expression then, understanding, but also worry, because he knew what that meant. Somewhere out there, something had started moving, something that would need her. He stepped back, letting her pass. The others parted for her without speaking. She walked across the range with the Springfield slung easy over her shoulder, her step steady, deliberate, and Stevens stood there, watching the Viper walk away, knowing the quiet between now and whatever came next wouldn't last. The road out of Blackwater was long and empty, a strip of cracked asphalt cutting through pine forest and open fields. Maya drove it slow, her eyes not on the horizon but on the rearview mirror. Nothing followed her, at least nothing obvious. The Springfield lay across the back seat, still in its battered case. She hadn't cleaned it after the final course. She'd thought about it, but there was a part of her that didn't want to wipe away the smell of gunpowder, the warmth of the last shot. It was like leaving a door half open. 3 days had passed since the course ended. 3 days of keeping to herself, walking the narrow streets of her quiet town, buying groceries in the early morning when no one was around. She'd gone to the range once, the local one, but it felt small now, like shooting in a hallway after spending time in an open desert. Still, she'd almost convinced herself that the Blackwater weekend was just that, a weekend, a closed loop, until the envelope showed up. It was waiting in her mailbox, no return address. The paper was thick, almost waxy, the way classified hand carries used to feel. Inside was a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but the details were clear enough. A man in a suit, stepping out of an SUV, his face turned just enough for her to recognize him. Even after all this time, in the lower right corner, in handwriting she hadn't seen since before her disappearance, was a date. 2 weeks from now, and the location, Istanbul. She burned the envelope in the sink, watching the paper curl into black ash. But the photograph, she folded it once and slid it into her jacket pocket. That night, she dreamed of the old days. Not the missions, the nights between them, waiting in safe houses, listening to the sound of someone breathing in the next room, wondering if you'd still be alive by sunrise. The next morning, she was already up when the phone rang. An unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but the message was short enough to fit in her head in one pass. Blackwater wasn't a coincidence. "You'll need the rifle." No name, no voice she recognized. By the second ring of the next call, she picked up. "You're not easy to find," Stevens said. His tone wasn't the one he'd used at the range. There was no instructor's authority here, no professional distance. It was the voice of someone stepping off a ledge. "You shouldn't be calling me," she said. "Maybe not, but I need to know something after you left. Someone contacted me. They wanted your file. What I have isn't enough to track you. But if they dig in the right places, they'll find me." He didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. There was a pause, a small exhale on his end. "I know you don't owe me anything, but if you're going to Istanbul, you're not walking into it blind." Her grip tightened on the phone. "And what makes you think I'm going?" "You wouldn't have picked up if you weren't." For a long time, neither of them spoke. She could hear faint wind on his end. Maybe the edge of a tarmac. Maybe an open training field. Finally, she said, "If this is about Viper business, you walk away now." "I don't think it's about Viper business," he said. "I think it's about something worse." The line went dead. She stayed still for a while after, her eyes on the Springfield in its case. She knew the next step wasn't optional anymore. The quiet she'd been building for years was already gone. She just hadn't admitted it yet. That afternoon, she opened the case and began to break the rifle down for travel. The plane touched down just after dawn. The sky over Istanbul still washed in the pale silver of early morning. Maya stayed seated until most of the passengers had already crowded into the aisle. She wasn't in a hurry to get off. Not until she'd scanned the faces passing her row twice, looking for anyone who shouldn't be here. Her Springfield travel disassembled in a hard case, disguised as a set of camera tripods. A local contact had handled the import paperwork, a name she hadn't used in years scrawled on the manifest. She kept her carry-on light, a change of clothes, a compact tool roll, and a phone she bought with cash 2 hours before boarding. The terminal was loud, announcements echoing in Turkish and English, wheels clattering over tile. She didn't slow until she reached the curb outside, where the air was sharp with the smell of diesel and the sea. Her driver was leaning against a dented sedan, a cigarette pinched between 2 fingers, early 40s, local. No visible weapons, but the way his eyes swept the crowd told her he'd done military time. "You're early," he said in Turkish. "Then we're on schedule," she replied in the same language. They didn't talk during the drive. The city rose and fell in waves outside the window, crowded markets, narrow streets, flashes of the Bosphorus through gaps between buildings. She caught herself mapping the routes automatically, noting choke points, elevated lines of sight, blind corners. The apartment was in Beyoklu, on the 4th floor of a building whose plaster had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. 2 rooms, minimal furniture, and a balcony overlooking a street where a shoemaker's stall sat opposite a tea vendor's cart. She unpacked, slowly laying out her tools on the small kitchen table. The photograph from the envelope went into the center. She studied it again. The man in the suit, stepping out of the SUV. He hadn't aged well. The jaw was heavier, the hair thinner. But the eyes, those were the same. Eyes she'd last seen in a Syrian safe house, lit by the flicker of a single bulb before everything went wrong. His name back then had been Arkan Salib, though she doubted it was the one on his passport now, arms broker, fixer, and, in at least one instance, the man who'd supplied weapons that killed people she'd fought to keep alive. The date and location scrawled on the photo were only 2 days away. Not much time to find him before he moved again. She spent the first day walking, not chasing, just letting the city breathe around her. A sniper's eyes weren't only for distances. You had to learn the rhythm of a place, when the shopkeepers swept their stooks, when the police changed shifts, when the ferries blew their horns on the hour. By sunset, she had 3 vantage points mapped within the district marked on the photo. That night, she sat up on the balcony. Springfield balanced on the ledge. The barrel pointed down into the street was unloaded. This wasn't about firing. It was about measuring angles, testing lines of sight, how the morning sun would throw glare off the shop windows, how the evening shadows would climb the walls. She was cleaning the rifle when the feeling hit, that quiet electric pull at the back of her neck. She wasn't alone. She didn't look up right away, just kept her hands moving, her eyes on the cleaning cloth. When she finally glanced at the street, she saw him, a man leaning on the tea vendor's cart, watching her building. Not openly, he was half-turned, sipping from a glass, but his attention was wrong. People watching the street looked at movement, traffic, other people. This man's gaze kept lifting toward the 4th floor. She stayed in her chair until he finished his tea and drifted away. But when she stepped inside, She swapped a light bulb in the front room for a red lens lamp, the kind that wouldn't silhouette her against the window. The second day was reconnaissance with intent. She moved through the district like smoke, changing jackets, slipping in and out of crowds. Twice, she spotted the tea cart man again, once on a tram platform, once by a fruit stall. Both times, he wasn't watching her directly, but he was too often in the same places for it to be coincidence. By evening, she had enough to test him. She took a side street through Karaki, a narrow lane lined with shuttered shops. Halfway down, she ducked into a doorway and waited. 45 seconds later, the man appeared, walking at an unhurried pace. His eyes swept the shadows in a way that told her he knew she'd stopped. That night, she loaded the Springfield for real. The meet location from the photograph was a riverside cafe near the Galata Bridge. Popular with tourists in the daytime, but quieter after dark. Salib would arrive with security. She'd seen him move before, and he never traveled with less than 3 men. Getting close would be risky. She'd need to be in position before he arrived. But when she reached her first vantage point, the narrow rooftop above a carpet shop, she found it already occupied. The tea cart man was there, only he wasn't leaning casually now. He was prone behind a suppressed M40 rifle, the barrel trained. On the same cafe, for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The city noise felt distant, muffled by the rush of blood in her ears. Then he lifted one hand, palm up, fingers spread, the old hand signal for hold. She didn't lower her rifle, but she didn't fire either. He turned his head just enough for her to see his face in profile. She recognized him then. Not from Istanbul, but from somewhere darker. The Hindu Kush, maybe, or the outskirts of Homs. A ghost from another time, which meant he knew her too. Salib's SUV rolled into view below, the men in the cafe doorway straightening at the sight. The tea cart man shifted his aim slightly. Maya kept hers steady on the same spot. The decision came in a thin slice of silence between them. She angled her rifle just enough to let him know she wasn't taking the shot. His round cracked first, glass shattering in the cafe. One of Salib's guards dropped. Chaos spilled into the street. Shouts. A second shot. The SUV door slamming. Maya's focus narrowed to the gap between 2 market stalls 50 yards down. Salib bolted toward it, and she let herself take just one breath before sending her round into the stone wall above his head. The impact sprayed dust into his path, making him stumble, just long enough for the tea cart man to fire again. The shot missed. Deliberate, she thought, but it forced Salib into the open. And then, as suddenly as it began, the moment broke. Salib dove into the SUV, and it peeled away into traffic. By the time she lowered to Springfield, the rooftop was empty. The street smelled of cordite and exhaust long after the SUV was gone. Maya kept to the shadows on her way down from the rooftop, moving slow enough that she wouldn't catch the attention of the police units converging toward the cafe. Her mind wasn't on them anyway. It was on the tea cart man, the ghost with the M40, and the way he'd aimed for Salib without a flicker of hesitation. She took the long way back to Bayoklu, ducking through back alleys and side markets until the traffic noise thinned, and the narrow streets opened into familiar quiet. She kept her rifle case slung under one arm, head down. By the time she reached the apartment, the shoemaker was closing up shop. The tea vendor's cart already rolled away. The air above the street carried the faint trace of rain. She'd barely locked the door when she saw it. A folded sheet of paper slid under the frame. No knock. No sound. Inside, it held a single sentence, written in block letters. Not here for you. We need to talk. Below it, an address. A warehouse near the ferry docks. Midnight. She didn't like it, but she liked unanswered questions even less. The docks, after dark, were a maze of rusted corrugated metal and the smell of the sea. Cargo crates stood stacked in crooked towers. the narrow lanes between them lit by the occasional sickly yellow floodlight. She arrived early, keeping to the shadows near the meeting point. The sound of footsteps came before the figure emerged. The tea-cart man. Dressed in plain clothes now, no rifle in sight. "Thought you might skip," he said. His accent was hard to place, a blend of somewhere Slavic and somewhere else, sanded down by years of moving between places. "I thought about it," Maya replied. He stopped a few paces away, hands visible. "Name's not important. Let's just say I was Viper adjacent long time ago." She didn't flinch, but the way her fingers curled slightly told him she'd heard the word. He went on. "Salab isn't your problem anymore. He's part of something larger, something moving faster than any one of us can keep up with. You came because you got a photograph. I came because I got the same one with a different face." He reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out a photo identical in style to hers. Different handwriting in the corner, different date. The man in his photo was a name she knew, a facilitator who'd run weapons through Tripoli during the height of the Civil War. A man she'd assumed dead. "You think it's a list," she said. "I know it is." She studied him for a long moment. "Who sent them?" "That's the part I can't tell you. Not because I don't want to, because I don't know. The signature isn't in the message, it's in the method." Her eyes narrowed. "Viper method," he nodded once. "But not the team we knew, someone's using our playbook, and they're picking people who can still move in the shadows." The words landed heavy. She thought of Stevens, of the way he'd looked at her on the range. The weight in his voice when he'd said only Vipers train like that. "You think Stevens is connected?" she asked. "I think Stevens is smart enough to stay out of this," the man said. "But someone close to him isn't." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of a ferry horn rolling over the water. "What's your next move?" she asked. "Follow my name," he said. "It's not important now, but it will be when you hear it again. I'll be running parallel to you, whether you like it or not. Istanbul was just the first intersection. And Celeb? He'll circle back, they always do, but you should decide if you're staying retired." A laugh was short and without humor. "That decision was made for me when the envelope hit my mailbox." He smiled faintly, like he'd expected her to say that. "Then I'll see you down the road, Viper 7. He walked away without looking back at the apartment. She sat on the balcony with the Springfield across her lap. The street below was quiet, just the soft hum of the city at night. She broke the rifle down piece by piece, cleaning each part with slow, deliberate care. The photograph lay beside her, its corners soft from being folded and unfolded too many times in the past few days. She knew she should burn it. She knew keeping it was like leaving a trail of crumbs for someone else to follow, but she didn't. Instead, she thought about the years she'd spent hiding, living under a name that wasn't hers, shrinking her world down to a handful of safe places, avoiding every shadow that might hold a familiar face. She thought about Stevens's voice on the phone, the weight in it when he'd warned her that something worse than Viper business was moving out there. Somewhere in that thought, the decision settled. She wasn't going back to the world she'd left, but she wasn't staying in this one either. She was walking the line between the thin strip of ground where ghosts kept their footing. The wind off the Bosphorus picked up, carrying the smell of salt and diesel. She reassembled to Springfield, the action locking into place with a sound that felt older than she was. Down on the street, the tea vendor's cart rolled back into view for the morning crowd. People passed each other without looking, without knowing which of them might be carrying a rifle case under their coat, which of them might be watching from the high windows. Maya rested the rifle across her knees and let the city move beneath her. She didn't know when the next envelope would come or what name it would hold, but she knew she'd open it. She knew she'd go, because some skills aren't just hard to forget. They don't want to be forgotten, and sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't announce its arrival or explain its purpose. It simply acts. and leaves the rest in silence.